All right, so starting Sefer Yeshua, Parak Aleph, Pasuk Aleph. ויהי אחרי Moshe Eved Hashem, and it was after Moshe, the Eved Hashem, the servant of Hashem, passed away. Vayomer Hashem el Yeshua ben Nun Misharis Moshe Leimar. Hashem spoke to Yeshua ben Nun. Hashem said to Yeshua ben Nun, saying like this: Pasuk Beis, Moshe Avdi Meis, Moshe, my servant, died. The Ata, and now Kum Avaris HaYarden Hazeh, get up and cross over this Yarden. Ata, you v'chol ha'amazeh, and this entire nation, El Oretz, Asher Noichi, Noisein Lehem Lebnei Yisrael. And you and the entire nation, this entire nation, which is interesting, the Lashon Hazeh, to the land that I am giving to Bnei Yisrael. So let's try to unpack these psukim. Rashi starts off by saying that Vihi Achre Moshe is mechuber al seder ha-Torah ha-mesayemes b'ptiras Moshe v'zeh mechuber lo. Rashi's shtickle bothered by the fact that we're starting off the. I know most people are not into dikduk, and I'm not either. But sometimes when you have a little bit of a dikduk, something it can mean something. So Vayehi would sound like that it's attached to something that's before it because there's a vav, right? Vayehi, and it was. How do you start off a sefer with and? It doesn't work so well like that in the dikduk. So that's what Rashi says. It's mechuber al seder ha-Torah. It's attached to the Seder HaTorah, which ends off b'ptiras Moshe. Someone said something?
Doesn't Miguel start off like that?
Yeah, so we're going to get to that in a second.
Oh, fine, okay.
That's the Radak.
I'll stay for this year, but I'll just...
You already stayed. It's too late. This is attached to the parsha at the end of Zaytza Bracha of the Ptiras Moshe. Now, just derech agav, it's kedai to go through the midrashim at the end of Zaytza Bracha. Fascinating midrashim with different vikuchim, different debates that Moshe Rabbeinu had with different parts of the Bria. How Moshe Rabbeinu didn't want to leave, and he was talking to the Malach HaMoves, and he was talking to the Shemayim, and he was talking to the Yam, and all kinds of fascinating things. And the Medrash Rabbah, it's very. The Medrash Rabbah Sefer Torah is very short, but the Zaytza Bracha, there's a shtickle arichas over there. There's actually a Medrash called Medrash Ptiras Moshe, which goes through more in depth and more in detail about what happened. But I'll call upon him it would sound strange, but like Yitzhi mentioned, there are many other svarim that also many other parshas, many other svarim that start with Vayehi. Just to read the Radak quickly, not to get into it, he has a whole arichas over here, but he says that minig halosh and lichtei b'mkayim vav shaloi lahaysav l'chaber davar davar. A lot of times you have a vav that starts off a parsha or a sefer of some sort, and it's not coming to add or attach to anything. K'may b'yom hashlishi v'yisa Avram es einav. Ve'ela b'nei tzivon ve'aya ve'ana. What's ve'ela? V'toshev tamar v'sheimema. Yeah, no, V'eschanan is a perfect example because he's starting off a parsha like that, right? So the Radak explains that a lot of times it is okay in the Klali Adiktuk. He actually quotes from his Sefer Adiktuk. Kvar kasavnu b'Sefer Michlal asher chibarnu k'yesh lefarsham l'tosefesim chisaron ma'at. There's a tosefes that's coming to add something. And there's going to be some small chesaron. Each one has a specific reason of what it's for. I mean, you can't make a general rule that vayehi means kach v'kach, because there's vayehi that means there's vayehi that's attached to something. Then there's a vav that's not necessarily attached to something. But I think that we could say a little taich based on what the Gemara that we spoke last week. The pshat is like this: we said that the Gemara says in the Nedarim that if Klal Yisrael wouldn't have been chaytei, then they would have just gotten Chamisha Chumshei Torah and Sefer Yeshua. So if there's anything that's attached to Chamisha Chumshei Torah, it's this Sefer, much more than all the other Svarim. Meaning, it's true that the Megillah starts with Vayihi Me'achas Reish. It's true that you have other parashiyas or other Svarim Menach that would start off with a Vav. But over here, the pshat is, this is directly connected to the Chumash, directly connected to the Sefer Torah, in the sense that it's a continuation of the Torah, based on that Gemara Nedarim that you would have had, Klal Yisrael would have just gotten Sefer Chamish Chumshei Torah and Sefer Yeshua as being the Sefer of Klal Yisrael getting into Eretz Yisrael. Okay, that's number one. Number two, it's just kedai to mention what the Malbim speaks out about, really just to give a shtickle context of what's going on over here. So, Kol Zman that Moshe was alive, it wouldn't have been possible for Yeshua to cross the Yarden, and he gives two reasons for that. Reason number one is Yeshua isn't going to be leading a milchama when Moshe Rabbeinu was alive, because Moshe Rabbeinu was the general. He led Klal Yisrael in the Milchamas. Yeshua wouldn't be the one to lead the Milchamas in Eretz Yisrael if, instead of Moshe Rabbeinu, if Moshe Rabbeinu would still be alive. And in a certain sense, the only way to understand that is like this: that there was a shvuah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made that Moshe Rabbeinu can't cross the Yarden. So Achrei Moshe, after Moshe Rabbeinu was nifter, so then these two items that are blocking Klal Yisrael, so to speak, or Yeshua from going into Eretz Yisrael, from crossing over the Yarden, are not staring. They're not in the way anymore, because that's why it's Vayomer Hashem el Yeshua. So Yeshua was Zeichet to Nevuah, and he was Zeichet to lead Klal Yisrael, because he was the Mesharis of Moshe. He was the Moshe Rabbeinu's ultimate, you want to call it Gabbai, or took care of him. And the Gemara says that that it's the one madrega of anything that's greater than Talmud Torah itself is being Mishamish Tלמידי Chachamim, which I want to explain in a few minutes what that is. I just want to finish the Malbim and then we'll get to that. So the Malbim continues that the pasuk calls Moshe Rabbeinu Eved Hashem, meaning that even after his Ptira, he's still considered an Eved Hashem. Why is that? Because the Gemara says in Saita, Ma'akana Amid Mashamish, Avsham Amid Mashamish. Meaning Moshe Rabbeinu's avodah is not finished. He still has an avodah that he's got to take care of in Shemayim. What does that mean? So a tzaddik that's very busy to be mashlim his own avodah, so if it's his personalized avodah, so when he leaves this world, so he finished his personal avodah, so he's done. So whatever it is, at la'achar ma'aseh, he finished what he's got to do. Masha'ein kain, a tzaddik that's working to be mashlim his generation, to give Torah to his generation, to give Torah for all generations. Like Shtei in Chazal, that every Talmud Chacham has a spark of Moshe Rabbeinu in him. Meaning any person who's sitting down to learn Torah anywhere has automatic shaykhs to Moshe Rabbeinu, even who knows how many hundreds and thousands of years later. But a tzaddik who's Isaac to be mesakin his generation and the next generation, to teach Torah to others, to further the Jewish continuity to others. So then he's Zoicha and he's Mezaked, the next generation. And this avodah is going to continue even when he's in Shemayim. Like the pasuk in Tehillim says, his tzidkus stands for him forever. Meaning his tzidkus is ongoing. It didn't end by his ptira. So that's what happened by Moshe Rabbeinu. It's rather interesting, because if you look in the Gemara Saita and Daf Yudalad, where the Gemara discusses Moshe Rabbeinu not being able to get into Eretz Yisrael, the Gemara says that yes, Moshe Rabbeinu actually, there's a man d'Amar in the Gemara that Moshe Rabbeinu never died. He's still alive. So even according to the man d'Amar, or like if he the parshas of the psukim that he was nifter, but we have this idea that this tzaddik lives on. But it kasay medas laad.
Isn't it kasha on what Malk just said?
Why?
I mean, if Moshe Rabbeinu is still alive, how could he come to
Right. No. So obviously, so that's shver in that Gemara. I'd rather think that the Taisus, they try to work it out over there in that Gemara. It's not the pashtus. I mean, it's shver for many points, but the basic concept of that would be, l'chayra, is that he, like we say, his spirit lives on, But it's by Moshe Rabbeinu, it's more than that, because Chazal say that any Talmud Chacham, or anybody that's Isaac B'Torah, is tapping into the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. Meaning Moshe Rabbeinu is the klalius, is the general idea and the general concept of people being Isaac B'Torah. I just want to I just want to talk a little bit about what it means that he was Mesharis Moshe. So the Malbim threw out a line over here that it's Gedayla Shimusha Yosem Milimuda. So that line comes from a Gemara Brachas. Let's see if I can get a Gemara. I should have got it before. I'll get a Gemara real quick. So it's interesting, because the person that the Gemara picks on to teach us Gedayla Shimusha Yosem Milimuda is not Yeshua ben Nun, even though the pasuk says beferish that Yeshua ben Nun was Mesharis Moshe. So that's a kasha that always bothered me. And the Medrash Lamaisa, the Medrashim over here, the Yalkut and others, bring over here in Yeshua, bring it about Yeshua. So the question is why.
So, can you say the kasha again?
Yeah. The Gemara says like this. First, we'll see the Gemara inside. This is Brachas Zayin Amud Beis. V'amar b'yechna mishum Reb Shimon ben Yochai. Gedola shimusha shel Torah yoser milimuda. It's greater to be mishamish Talmidei Chachamim than Torah itself, more than learning Torah itself. Shenemar, what's the pasuk? Pai Elisha ben Shafat asher yotzak mayim al yedei Eliyahu. Here is Elisha ben Shafat, which was Eliyahu Hanavi's Talmud, one of the greatest relationships of Rebbe and Talmud that we know from Tanakh, aside from Moshe Rabbeinu and Yeshua, is Elisha and Eliyahu. Asher yotzak mayim al yedei Eliyahu. Lo mad lo nemar. It doesn't say that he learned from Eliyahu. Eliyotzak, he poured water. It doesn't mean literally poured water, but it means he took care of physically helping Eliyahu with whatever it was that he needed, and also continuing and furthering his Torah and his Avodah, and making sure that whatever his Rebbe taught him would continue. Eliyotzak. It says that he poured water. So it means to teach you that Shimush shel Torah is greater than learning. So what does it mean? What does that mean? What's the parsha to teach of Gedolah Shimush Yosem Limuda? So the good thing is we have a Rashi later on in Brachos that tells us the answer to this question. So Rashi on Mem Zayin Amud Beis in Brachos, the Gemara here is talking about what's in Am Haaretz. So there's a whole brayso over here. It's Mem Zayin Amud Beis. Ezu Am Haaretz. Kol she'ena kriyish ma'arvis v'shachris divrei Rebbe Lezer. Rebbe Lezer says Am Haaretz is a person who doesn't read, doesn't say kriyish ma. Rabbi Yeshua Omer kol she'ena miniach tefillin. Ben Azai Omer kol she'ena tzitzis b'vigdai. Some doesn't read tzitzis, some doesn't read tefillin. Rabbi Nassan Omer kol she'ena mizuzah al pischai. Some doesn't care about mizuzah. Rabbi Nassan bar Yosef Omer kol she'yesh leibon v'ena megadol l'talmud Torah. Person who has children doesn't send them to yeshiva. Achei Omerim afilu kara v'shana v'lo shimush Talmidei Chachamim harei ze Am Haaretz. A person who's fluent in Nach and fluent in Mikra, which that was we spoke about last week, means the whole Tanakh. V'shana, and he's fluent in all the Mishnayos. V'lo shimush Talmidei Chachamim, but was not mishamish Talmidei Chachamim. Harei ze Am Haaretz. He's still in Am Haaretz. A guy you could test him on Shisha Siddur Mishnah by heart. You could test him on Shisha Siddur Mishnah. Maybe he knows it well, but still he doesn't qualify.
Most people today are Ami Haaretz.
No.
According to this.
According to what we're saying right now, but we're going to correct it in half a second. Let's see what Rashi says. What does it mean, Shimish Talmidei Chachamim? Hu ha-Gemara. Shimish Talmidei Chachamim means Gemara. What does that mean? Hatluya b'svara. Gemara is something that you learn with svara. Shahayu noisnil divrei Mishnah tam, to try to understand the time of HaMishnah. They would gather together and they would be busy trying to understand the svaros and the time of Mishnah. And this is the dogma. This is an example of the actual Gemara that we have. Right? Think about it. Many people like learning Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Many people like learning Mishnah Berurah. Right? Why is it so easy to learn Kitzur Shulchan Aruch? Because all the halachas are laid out for you. There's nothing, you don't have to figure it out. Right? Gemara, Rashi's saying a lot in these two lines over here, but basically what Rashi's saying is that we're trying to understand the Svaras HaMishnah, right? And it's not just that I'm sitting in my little corner trying to understand the Svaras HaMishnah on my own, but we have a Chabura and we sit together and we try to figure out what the Mishnayos are saying. What's the Svaras HaMishnayos? There's a give and take, and it becomes a lively situation where we're all trying to figure it out and we're yelling at each other. Now, if you learn Gemara, the Gemara is full of back and forth. It's full of a shakl of atarya. You think it's really like this? No, I'll tell you it's like that. You think it's like that? No, I'll tell you really it's like this. I have a kal v'chomer. You don't have a kal v'chomer. You have Gzei Rishava. Oh, Gzei Rishava we have to respect. On and on like that. It's not piskei halachas. So Shimush Talmidei Chachamim, according to Rashi saying, is really 2 points. Is really the concept of trying to understand the time of Mishnah, but it's not enough to just sit down and try to understand the time of Mishnah, but it's learning it, being misasif yachad, gathering together to try to, unpack and understand what the Mishnayos are saying. I'll just end off with a Maral, how the Maral explains what Shimush Chachamim means, and why it's greater than Talmud Torah. Let me make sure I have it here. Yeah. If you're familiar with Pirkei Avos, in the 6th parak, the Memches Kinyonim Shatorah Niknis Behem. The 48 ways how a person could be kohen Torah, And one of them is, the ninth one, according to Maral's count, Al-Kapanim, is B'Shimush Chachamim. Right? So Maral explains what this means. I'll read it inside. Sheyishamish Chachamim v'oz hu roi l'kabel ha'Torah. When a person serves Chachamim and takes care of their needs, I guess, then he's right to be Mekabel the Torah. But Parakam the Brachas, he quotes our Gemara that we just said. Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Mishum Bayachai, G'dayla Shimush Yesim Ilimud, Shenama Yesh Pay Elisha Ben Shavat, Asher Yotzek Mayim Al De'alio, Lomad Leinam Al Yotzek, Adkan. Okay. Pirush Tov is that. What's the understanding of this? Ki HaMeshamish es Talmud Chacham. A person who serves the Talmud Chacham, Hine HaTalmud Mischaber L'Rav Al Yidei Shimush Shel Torah. Ubazeh HaTalmud Mekabel Min HaRav. The Talmud connects himself and attaches himself to the Rebbe al yidei shimush shel Torah, al yidei trying to understand the Torah, right? Because remember, Rashi says that shimush chachamim means to try to understand what the Torah is saying, not just to learn it, but to try to understand the svaros and the Taimei Mishnah. Ubazeh Talmud mekabel min harav, and this is how the Talmud is going to be able to be mekabel the Torah from the Rebbe. Meaning that the Talmud is going to be able to be makabel the Divrei Torah, that the Rabbi is being mashpia onto the Talmud. Ki ein sofik, there is no doubt, ki kasher tikrav hapsila el haner, that when the wick gets close to the candle, shehaner madlik es hapsila, that the wick gets lit. V'kach kasher yikrav haTalmud el Rav al yidei shimusha shemashpia olav haTorah, that when a Talmud tries to bring himself closer to the Rebbe by serving him, by trying to understand what the Rebbe is saying, that it's mashpia more Torah onto him. So it's not just that the Talmud understands what the Rebbe is saying, but it's also trying to understand the halach yelech and the hanhagas of the Rebbe. But it's not only that; it's even more than that. This is a lot more than when a Talmud is just trying to learn from the Rav. There's a lot more when a person hangs around Tלמידי Chachamim, aside from learning from them. When a person goes to learn from a Rebbe, he hears the shiur and he leaves, he goes home, that's it. Now, no one could deny that he could have gained tremendously from the shiur itself, from the actual Talmud Torah, the actual halachas, the actual lamdas, the actual svaras that he's hearing from the Rav. No one could deny that he's gaining tremendously from that. But there's something a lot greater than just that. And what is that? That is the Shimush Chachamim. Ki ein zeh mashba lulmad min Rav chibrei love. Rak davar zehu chibrei love. Learning from a Rebbe is not an attachment to a Rebbe. Kasher mishamish I say. And then the Maral says he explained it elsewhere. But I just want to speak out my understanding of what the Maral means. I don't know if I'm right, but this is my understanding of it. I spent a lot of time thinking about it. I hope I'm correct. I think the pshat is like this. If you go hear a shiur, you hear the shiur, you go home. You could love the shiur, and you could say it over, and you could give it over to other people. But if you don't spend time trying to get into the Rebbe's mind, right, and trying to understand why the Rebbe said it like this, why the Rebbe said it like that, right, which would be like the way Rashi says in Brachas, to try to understand the Svaras Taimei HaMishnah. But not only that, how does the Rebbe act after the shiur? I follow the Rebbe. I want to know what this Rebbe has to offer out of the shiur. And I remember somebody saying, a certain Rishiv used to read the newspaper every day just to see what's going on in the world. I remember a Talmud Chacham saying, it's kedai to spend time with this Rosh Hashiva when he's reading the newspaper, when he's eating lunch, because then you'll know how to understand the news. It's a much broader picture when you're spending your life, when your life revolves around how a Talmud Chacham lives. How does a Talmud Chacham eat? How does a Talmud Chacham sleep? How does he take a vacation? What does his Shabbos Suda look like? What does Yom Tov for him look like? What is his davening about? What's his interactions with other people? If you're just coming to the shiur, you're not going to gain that much in the hanhagas of outside the Bismedrash from the Rebbe. When a person attaches himself to a Rebbe shiur, he's attaching himself to the seichel of the Rebbe. He's attaching himself to maybe to the highest madreg of the Rebbe Shaykh. But what the Maral is saying is that when a person attaches himself to the Rebbe, not just in Talmud Torah, but in every other area also, he connects himself to every part of the Rebbe, to the entire Kaima Shlema, to the entirety of the Rebbe. Because the Rebbe isn't just Seichel. The main thing that the Rebbe gives over to his Talmidim is the Seichel HaTorah, is the Das Torah. But there's so much more about the Rebbe, how he deals with, I was closer to Aaron Shechter. I used to, every Shabbos I used to walk him to Yeshiva for a couple of Shabbos. We used to learn together. That 5-minute walk from his house to Yeshiva, things would happen then, and it was interesting to note, like how he walks in the street, how he's, how he greets other people in the street. By just going to a shir, you're not going to see that.
You still feel a kesher with him?
I mean, he's not around, but I still feel connected, sure. So I think about him all the time.
He's not around, right? But you still feel kesher with him.
Yeah, and that's sort of what the Malbim was trying to say also.
You feel kesher with him how?
I think about him. Like what would the famous Vart? I'll say it quickly because I want to finish already. But there's a famous Vart from Chaim Shmulevitz.
I'm still trying to understand how what I asked you about the more in Brachos, where you said that unless you are Shimush a Rav, that you were considered an Amaris, and you were saying that that's not so Negea today.
Yeah, so that I'll explain is Pashat because today we all learn Gemara. Most of us. I mean, hopefully, right? So when we're learning Gemara, by I believe this is what Chazal want, is that we should learn how to develop certain analytical thinking skills, how to learn something. By learning Mishnayos and by learning Chumash, you don't develop those analytical skills. There's a certain skill that we're supposed to develop by learning Gemara, right? And so that's why today, anybody that learns Gemara would not be nichlal in this, wouldn't be included in this.
So someone you're saying that learning Gemara, the Ian, is like being a Mishamash Rebbe.
Yeah. But that's maybe one level of it. But the actual physical Shimush Talmiday Chachamim, in a sense, is connecting yourself to the entirety of the Rebbe, not just when the Rebbe's in the Bismedish.
So that the Maharal was saying that by following a Rebbe around and just seeing what he does, that being a Shimush.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, even though you're not necessarily literally being Mishamish the Rebbe,
right?
Just following him around,
yeah,
that is a Shimush.
Because you're gaining so much more than by just, I mean, the way I grew up is I grew up in Chaim Berlin, I grew up around the Rhine, and people would, the Talmidim would hang around him, whatever it was, and they would ask him, why is the Rishiva doing this? Why is the Rishiva doing that?
Do you think that those people who follow the Rebbe around, do you think they had kavanah to be b'shamish him?
Yeah, for sure.
Really?
Many of them. I can't say I can't talk for everyone, but many of them were taka trying to gain from him, because there was what to gain from him, and it's lav dafka him. Kol B'dei Yisrael is what to.
You felt that way?
Yeah, by Aaron for sure. But everything by him was about teaching Talmidim. Everything. Just to end off with a short famous vart from Chaim Shmulevitz. The Gemara says in a few places, the Tana Rebbe Lezer never said anything that he didn't hear from his Rebbe. He would only say over Divrei Torah from his Rebbe. But yet, in the beginning of Perek Rebbe, who is his Rebbe? So I believe Rebbe Yeshua. He went to learn by. He's stumping me on this one. Rabbi Yechon Mezakai for sure. Rabbi Yechon Mezakai. That's pretty obvious. Yeah. But
Rabbi Eliezer that's Rabbi Eliezer.
Yeah. So in the beginning, if you look in the beginning of Pirkei Rebbe Lezer, the first parak, there's a whole story describing how Rebbe Lezer was 28 years old, and he never learned anything, and he didn't know anything. Very similar to how Rabbi Kiva started off. And he was crying, and he was working for his father. He was plowing in the field, and he was crying. I don't know, whatever the story was, but Kitzer, he ends up going to yeshiva. And it's a fascinating story. I hope to talk about it a different time. But he goes to yeshiva, and obviously he was starting off with very little background, very little knowledge of Torah. And the Medrash says of there how he learned with this one, and he learned a few psukim every day. Fine, time goes by, and he becomes the best guy in yeshiva. Not only does he become the best guy in yeshiva, it was at the point where they gave him rishus to say Shir Klali. And the story was that his father didn't want to have anything to do with him because his father told him he can't go to yeshiva. And there's signs up all around town that there's a new Rosh Yeshiva saying a big Shir Klali today, everyone's invited. So the father was in town that day, and he decides he's going to go to the Shir. the Lashon of the Medrash says that he said Divrei Torah that nobody heard since the days of since Har Sinai. Meaning, since Matan Torah, no one ever heard such brilliant Divrei Torah. I don't understand. The Gemara says that he never said anything that he didn't hear from his Rebbe. So how could he say all these kinds of Chidushim that no one ever heard? Right? So famous words from Chaim Shmulevitz, and others say it also, that the pshat is that it's not that his Rebbe, my Rebbe didn't say this word, so I can't use this word. But it's the kind of idea, meaning these ideas and these concepts, he would only talk concepts and ideas, what would his Rebbe say? Right? So that's what Rebbe Lezer was saying. That's what the Medrash is saying. He would only say ideas of what would my Rebbe say in such a situation, right? And it's true. He was able to come out with his own brilliant Chedushim, but it was only based on what his Rebbe would have said. Not that his Rebbe actually said them, but what his Rebbe would have or could have said, right? And that's really the baseline of how to work with the Rebbe. Meaning, what would my Rebbe do? We always hear this, when people talk about their Rebbeim. What would my Rebbe do in such a case? Think about it. The way we're supposed to think is based off of what we learned from our Rebbeim is what are we supposed to think in such and such a case? How are we supposed to work with, whether it's in learning, whether it's in life, whether it's even in halacha, it could be like that, based on the psak of what, could you compare this to that question that I once upon a time asked my Rebbe?
Do you feel like you have an understanding of Rav Aaron Schechter so well that you could actually know what he would do at this point? If you were to say, what would my Rebbe do? You would know what Rav Aaron Schechter would do.
I can't say I would know 100%, but it would. It would sound like this would be something that the Rishiva could have said. Like that's how I would think of it. That's how I could hear it also. They said over a story that one time he looked very, very bothered, and they kept on asking him, and he was like thinking, and he was like, "Oh, it's a tumult." So they asked him, like, "What's going on?" He said that a situation came up, and everything that he always said over was from his Rebbe Rav Hutner, and he said that he never had any this thing is such a new concept that came up. He never thought about it, how Rav Hutner would deal with it. He's not sure how Rav Hutner would deal with it, so he didn't know how to deal with it because he didn't want to make up his own thing. He only wanted to do something based on what his Rebbe would have done. I mean, that's a real Talmud. I'm not saying that everyone's on that madrega to only do 100% of what the Rebbe would have done. I think most of us are not like that, right? Most of us are mushbah from other, from other ideas and things like that, not just from our Rebbe.
I used to drive around with Reuben Feinstein.
Oh, very nice.
I actually more than once, and I actually asked him this question. I asked him because before I was going to move to Waterbury, I was going to move here because my